Between Western mysticism and Eastern Zen, there is a common trunk between the two. The master does not tell you anything is real. He is not out to convince. He simply becomes his philosophy, and thus is proof in himself. This is the essence of the Philosopher's Stone. If you imagine a utopia, it goes without saying that everyone would have to be cool. It is the wild cards out here that give the government an excuse to run rampant with their own crimes. But hypothetically, if every person was to give as much as they take and not conspire to benefit from the loss of others, the notion is feasible. Imagine now wanting to get into utopia. You would not necessarily have to pass a test as much as understand its meaning. A test can be forgotten and answers gone back on. You've seen elections. And even then, tests are subjective to representing a frozen moment of time in a perpetually changing world. There must be a deeper way of knowing that the wisdom of a person is to the point that everywhere he goes, he leaves that place a little bit better than it was before. This level of consciousness is not easy to come by or attain. The person must understand the hidden element of their subconscious mind that often does wrong while the ego remains blind to it. We have seen how selfish desire can be disguised as virtue, even to the very person in question. Becoming to this point means facing that dark spot of the psyche head on and getting your own hands dirty in the process. It means diving into the dumpster part of the mind and getting to know every portion that you hide from yourself. Some would rather die, and indeed, this is a form of death and rebirth. Once we identify these excess parts of the psyche, only then are they ready to burn away in alchemical fire. Once this death is conquered, you are tempered in the very ever-changing meaning around you, your will and desire being focused on the betterment of the overall world and not accompanied by the aim of how you see fit. You now enter utopia without a need for that prior inquisition, as you now radiate absolute certitude. Oversimplified as this is, it is the essence of the initiate. Once this has been mastered, beings of the higher and more subtle realms will take notice and begin to adopt you as their peer. Again, oversimplified, but this is the intro. Like Thoth and many like him, you are now considered the spaceborne initiate. The you has now died before any kind of physical death. You beat death at its own game, and now when physical death comes knocking, it has nothing to take home. Like the predators of primordial man and the archons of modern man, even death does not dare lay his hands on the flame. Society patterns our lives. We are in a web of dependence on everything around us, both puppet and puppeteer dancing. We feel like we can't become certain things without risking our paychecks, relationships, or reputation, or whatever. The things we want to do has a myriad of attachments tied to it, so even seeing it clearly is difficult. When that web of attachments disappears, it seems like a catastrophe. It's not. And you can thank yourself. That is your subconscious or higher self, whatever your favorite mouth noise for it is, because it found a way to burn off the residual substance from your core of purpose. The external world was creating patterns for you to follow that went against the grain of your real potential. When you can no longer depend on anyone but yourself, you are liberated, because now it doesn't matter if you fail or succeed, as long as you are that core that can't be tampered with. A pure substance like gold is something that cannot be added to or improved. When alchemical fire burns off additional elements that pollute a pure substance, it stands alone in its own value. Throwing Gucci on it only hides its brilliance and distracts from its realness. This is the same as a person's character. We burn off external distractions that might have us wavering in one direction or the other, away from our personal course of direction. And in a way, any conscious man is an alchemist once he understands that experiences are the chemicals of life with which the philosopher experiments. The world is his laboratory. Initiates of the Flame, Manly P. Hall's first book, 1922, comes out swinging right away in the preface. The initiates who took their oaths in the presence of the flame renounced the lesser concerns of ordinary life, and freed from the attachments of this material sphere, these purified souls become custodians of that symbolic flame of wisdom, which is the true light of the world. Manly P. Hall's philosophy was symbolical. He understood that our lives were a mirror of a deeper cosmic order, that we are extensions of an original source, a source that we can get closer to in phases of initiation. In a few of his books, he has stressed the importance that a person can very well be self-initiated, and that the temples, badges, and degrees and whatnot might be suiting for this art form, but altogether unnecessary. And to be frank, some of the most intelligent people I know would prefer a form of gnosis without the banana stickers attached. So, speaking of which, we can't rightly cover this subject without getting a misconception out of the way. Hall was a 33rd degree Freemason, and thus, according to conspiracy, Illuminati or whatever. This is nonsense to its core. But now hold on. Before you shout at me in the comments and boost my algorithm that way, I am not saying that the Masons have gone without corruption. Has there been groups working in the shadows that have infiltrated the Masonic lodges in order to gain a form of wisdom to be used as a tool in their own selfish endeavors? Sure, but I don't have a dog in that race on the subject and would rather give my attention to the cornerstone of learning here. I feel like selfish use of Masonic wisdom is an oxymoron anyway, and will implode on itself in its own time. Evil self-destructs because all it knows is destruction. So despite the rise and fall of nations and the corrupted rat race of society, there are those who see through the smog of materiality. This is especially difficult now, though, given the direction that most forms of media have taken on. Because, well, the direction it has taken on is specifically meant to fill your eyes with its fog. Degeneracy, lust, hate, and fear has crept into the hive mind of man and crippled it by way of black magic of the media, causing this inner flame in each of us to be buried in its own spiritual ashes. Those ignited by this flame are called pagan heathens by the church, called conspiracy theorists by the news, and called ADD and many other things by the schooling systems. This is certainly enough to make the potential in someone shy away. But it's not enough to make the flame die. In fact, it cannot die. As long as there is consciousness, it is there waiting to be fueled again. Whether you know it or not, the moments that you have chosen self-sacrifice for the betterment of others, you have fueled this very flame. After all, the flame emits light, and just like any flame, it does not have a preference as to what it illuminates. The flame in us honors Christ, but it also honors Orpheus, Hermes, Krishna, the Buddha. Let's see here, Muhammad, Zoroaster, Confucius, Odin. My apologies if I missed your favorite, but the point is that the flame does not pick a favorite and then choose to preach it. It simply illuminates where it is fueled. That flame is God, whatever it is you choose that to be personified as, and people are the sparks flinging off of that flame. As you can imagine, the further a spark travels from the flame, the dimmer it gets. Paul speaks of the cube altar that the flame sets on when it burns its sacrifice. The sacrifice might be a bull or a ram, causing many to wonder why there is so much animal violence in the Bible. It should be made clear, though, that the cube represents the man himself, and the animal sacrifice is that of a celestial zodiac that represents the lower nature of man. Animalistic desires within himself. Another bit of symbolism is the spade. This is often shown with a coffin or an open grave with a sprig of acacia strain laying with it. This is representing mortality due to its usefulness in digging into the ground as a shovel. The coffin and the grave, of course, go without saying, but that sprig of acacia might be interesting to some of you who have seen our prior videos. But it's not all doom and gloom with the spade, as it is also used to bury our darker passions and distracting emotions. It's also not all gardening tools over here either. You'll notice that with the rod attached to it like a shovel, it seems to resemble something else. The spade is the sacrum bone that fuels the fire of the spinal column, thus making it a symbol of passion and the arts. Like roots, we have the spinal nerves that transit the backbone, creating the tree of life, the center of which nourishes all created things. The creative energy that flows upward from the roots or the sacrum and fuel the altar flame at the top of the spine where ideas are born. Solutions and creativity are born. This is a two-way street, you see. The head doesn't have its power without the fuel from the sacrum, and the sacrum doesn't function without the information from the head. And what is important here is it is very simply the focusing of particular thoughts in this higher realm, the head, that aims the sacred energy of the lower flame, and when both are fully gassed up, the unit together becomes an unstoppable force. Go ahead and enter your no-fap jokes in the comments here. But nonetheless, the greater the fuel, the more powerful the flame. The darkness of the unknown can only be removed by light. The greater the light, the further back the darkness is repelled. And with this, we have the symbol of the philosopher or hermit carrying his lamp, where he can walk on uneven surfaces and along narrow cliff edges without fear. These obstacles, of course, symbolize the rat race that we are submersed in and the lower emotions within himself. He understands the promise of life and immortality as residing within him, represented by that sprig of an acacia strain, of which, again, the acacia strain is not necessarily completely symbolic, if you know what I'm saying. Google it. Mythologies and religions tend to have sacred places, oftentimes a mountain. Valhalla, Asgard, Mount Olympus, Mount Salvart of the Holy Grail mythology, Mount Sinai, and so on. Hall finds this to be very heavily symbolic as well. When the spinal fire of man starts upward in its wanderings, it stops at many shrines and visits many holy places. For like the Masonic brother and his Jacob's ladder, the way that leads to heaven is upward and inward. The spinal fire goes through the centers or seed ground of many great principles. Only after pain and suffering and long labor does it cross the waste of sand, and before him, in the heart of the lotus, rises the golden city, Shambhala. In the spreading of the bone between the eyes, called the frontal sinus, is the seat of the divine in man. There in a peculiar, it's like, I've never been able to nail that one. Peculiar, unfamiliar gaseous material. Let me just go ahead and kick that right back off here. There, in an unfamiliar gaseous material, floats, or rather exists, the fine essence which we know as the spirit. This is the lost city in the sacred desert, connected to the lower world by the rainbow bridge or silver cord. And it is to this point in himself that the student is striving to rise. This is the sacred pilgrimage of the soul, in which the individual leaves the lower man and the world below and climbs upward into the higher man or higher world, the brain. This is the great pilgrimage to Shambhala. And as the great city is the center for the direction of our earth, so the corresponding great city in man is the center of his governmental system. When any other principle governs man, he is not attuned to his own higher self. Let the seeker remember that all of these things must first happen within himself before he can find himself in the universe without. The 12 elder brothers within himself must first be reached and understood before those of the universe can be comprehended. If he would see that sacred city in the lotus blossom, he must first open that lotus within himself, which he does petal by petal, when he purifies and attunes himself to the higher principles within. So P. Hall has got quite a way of just wrapping up just about everything within very few words. Kind of makes me feel like a baby. But that last portion there reminds me of the absurdity discussed in our prior series on beings from outer worlds, and how it is utter confusion and sometimes terror to average human beings who encounter these higher energies without having found a concrete foundation within themselves to be able to comprehend such abstraction. Also noted here is the lotus, which we have covered many times, that rings the phrase "no mud, no lotus," being that the roots of the lotus are very deep in materiality, while the petals are able to rise up and experience the immortality of sunshine because of its stability from the roots. Which goes to show you that we cannot attain a spiritual life by simply shedding all material endeavors. There is a yin and yang here, and we can't have one without the other. This is a cooperative system and not a competitive one. The mountain is high because the valley is low. I have seen so many people who failed in their spiritual quest because they want to drop everything in the physical world or just anything that they find to be unpleasant. They forget to keep their roots seated in what is real, Maya, because, well, it turns out we live in the physically real. 1 foot in the grave, babe. Eons of amnesia have come and gone since the heights of the Egyptian priest kings. Egypt was once considered the land of great truths and in many ways the cradle of initiation. Pharaoh is the Egyptian word for king, but make no mistake, due to the subtle power of Kundalini energy, they were considered demigods with 1 foot on earth and the other in heaven. A degeneration took place throughout the ages of Egypt, possibly due to the link between our collective hive mind and the ages of the Kali Yuga cycles. As the earth went through its cyclical changes, so did we. But mythology and religions can agree with mathematical science in one regard, that Egypt was once the epitome of gnosis concerning the joint relationship between spirit and man, whatever it is they consider spirit to be. Try to picture for a moment the Great Hall of Luxor, its inscriptive columns holding up domes of solid granite, each column carved with the histories of the gods. There, at the upper end of the chamber, sat the Pharaoh of the Nile in his robes of state. Around him, his counselors, chief among them the priests of the temple. An imposing spectacle it surely was. The gigantic frame of the later Atlantean, robed in gold and priceless jewels. On his forehead, the coiled serpent of the initiate, the serpent which was raised in the wilderness, that sleeping serpent's power in man, whose coiled head downward around the tree of life drove him from the garden of the Lord, but which raised upon the cross became the symbol of the Christ. The encircled serpent is the crown of the ancient gods. It shows that the two paths or parts of the spirit fire have been united. This crown is the symbol of mastery, and the union takes place within the serpent when the life forces are lifted to the brain. The serpent working upward in the regenerated individual is called the Kundalini. This serpent was the sign that within him the serpent had been raised, for the true Pharaoh was a priest of God, as well as a master of men. There he sat upon the cube altar throne, indicating his mastery over the four elements of his physical body, who, in spite of all his power and glory, still bowed in humble supplication to the will of the gods. In his hands he carries the triple scepter of the Nile, the shepherd's crook, and the Anubis-headed staff, and the flail or whip. These were the symbols of his work. They represent the powers which he had mastered. With the whip, he had subjugated his physical body. With the shepherd's hook, he was the guardian and keeper of his emotional body. With the Anubis-headed staff, he was the master of his mind and worthy to wield the powers of government over others because, first of all, he obeyed the laws himself. A wise king of a wise people, and it was through these priest kings that the divine worked, for they were of the order of Melchizedek. Through them was formed that doctrine which degeneracy has not been able to entirely obliterate. They were conscious instruments in the hands of a ready writer, willing and proud to do the work of those with whom, through knowledge and truth, they had attuned themselves. But the time came, as in all nations, when selfishness and egotism entered the heart of the king and people alike, and slowly the hand from the great white brotherhood that fed ancient Egypt was withdrawn, and the powers of darkness transformed the land of glory into one of ruins, and the names of the mighty kings were buried beneath the oblivion of degeneracy. The great temples of the pharaohs are ruins, and the temples of Isis are but broken heaps of sandstone. But what of the priest kings who labored there in the days of its glory? Well, their flame is still with us in Gnosis. They have continued to walk the path. Although his scepter is gone and his priestly vestments have molded away, the priest king still walks the earth with the dignity and the power and the childish simplicity that before made him great. He no longer wears the robes of his order. Although he bears no credentials, he is as much a priest king now as then, for he still bears the true insignia of his rank. The hand that bestowed the riches of the past does little acts of kindness now. Although he no longer carries the scepters of self-mastery, still he manifests that mastery in his daily life. Although the altar fires within the temple of Karnak have long been dead, the true fire within himself still burns, and before that he still bows as he once bowed in the days of Egypt's glory. If you have ever immediately liked someone despite their humble appearance, and likewise disliked someone despite a plethora of charm, or if you have ever seen intelligent people who were downright fools, and likewise people who knew very little but were somehow very wise, those are likened to the insignia of ancient rank. It is a hierarchy that no loss of title or position can destroy. These humble and wise men are kings without crowns. Quite the opposite of our modern day puppets dressed in fine suits and ties. The old ones are still kings and will be as long as they bow to that greater good before them. The crown might be replaced with thorns, but the fire continues to burn. Paul insists throughout Initiates of the Flame that every sacred thing outside of man represents some organ or function within himself. This goes all the way back to the pyramid, and you know which one I'm talking about, as Hall has insisted that the Great Pyramid is the OG. At first, I wondered if he was aware of the Bosnian Pyramid, and probably not, but it seems that age and size is not what makes the Great Pyramid of Giza so special. We have covered on this channel before the mathematics of the pyramids, and when we add Hall's take here, it adds a symbolic notion, and this tells me that the purpose of the Great Pyramid is threefold. Mathematically, it illustrates our place in the solar system, the Earth and the Sun-Moon relationship. Again, something we've covered. Architecturally, it was used as a power plant, utilizing harmonic cymatics. What it was used to power, though, we have no idea, but hopefully some new theories will come through, enough to make a full video on that in the future. But even then, I hesitate to make that video, considering that Y-Files pretty much knocked it out of the park on that one. So, I mean, hit me up in the comments if you have an idea as to what this clean energy was used for. And then third, we have the symbolic representation put together by Hall. The four-sided base of the pyramid represents the four elements in which man's bodies are composed: hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon. Once upon a time, though, this may have been considered water, air, fire, and earth, the latter set of which is likened to the body, as the physical body is raised from the earth, the vital body from water, the emotional body from fire, and the mental body from air. Adding up the sides of the triangles, we have 12, or the 12-fold constitution of man split up into the 12 zodiacal dividends. We also have the 12 cranial nerves, and the list of things that are tuned to the counting system of 12 could go on and on at this point, but Hall mentioned that absolutely no royalty was ever buried within the pyramid, which, yes, I realize we already know, but considering this book came out in 1922, he was certainly ahead of his time on that notion. Well, not notion, but on that lie, as we seem to continue finding out more and more that the tomb hypothesis seems to be less of a mistake and more of a cover-up to throw off the magnitude of this immortal work. Speaking of which, can we stop calling it the King's and Queen's Chambers? This is like continuing to call Native Americans Indians long after finding out that they are not that. There is something silly about the human dialect. When we call something a word or a name and it sticks, we have a really hard time updating our lingo, but the chambers do seem to be used as a coffer for initiation. Hall writes about this: the candidate was buried in the earth and resurrected, a symbol of death of the lower man and the liberation of the higher. It is said that Moses was initiated in the Great Pyramid, and some also say that Jesus was instructed there also. Be that as it may, we know that for thousands of years since the time it was built by the Atlanteans, it has been the greatest temple of initiation in the world. It seems also that its work is not yet done, for mutely it is teaching those who will see the mysteries of creation. There is probably no point that is as important in connection with the pyramid as that of the cornerstone. On the very top of the Great Pyramid is a comparatively flat space about 30 feet square. I didn't know it was that big. In other words, the true stone, which is the head of all the corners, is missing. If we look at the reverse side of the United States seal, we find again that the pyramid from which the top is separated. Omar, a great Persian poet, gives us the secret of the keystone when he says, quote, "From my base metal shall be filed a key, which shall unlock the door he howls without. Upon the cross matter that forms our bodies hangs the key to all mysteries of creation. It is our duty to take this key and with it unlock the door that conceals from us the unknown. The key is spirit." The value of the Great Pyramid is only possible when all of these elements are united into one. When all of these triangles rest on each other, they stand erect. We are all aware of the allegory of King Arthur's sword. Basically, raw strength didn't matter. Only a righteous person could pull the sword out from the stone cube. You can go ahead and twist this into a size doesn't matter, it's what you do with it type of parable, if you would like. Have fun with it. It's mythology. Make it your own. It's Plato. Written on the stone were these words, quote, "Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is rightwise king, born of England." So the stone cube represents the physical body and its sensory limitations and desires. For more on that, see the video that you've all seen. The anvil represents experience in the cold, hard world, as it is the tool used to sharpen the sword. And of course, the sword is a representation of the spirit to be freed from the limitations of man's biology, the cube. Now, the sword itself is a common theme in a lot of mythology, considering it is a weapon of righteousness. It was used to slay dragons, and of course we know that in mythology, dragons are more than just a story enhancer. They represent the reptilian nature of man, the amygdala, where our fight or flight survival mode is stuck with us. I'll stop there in this regard though. We have covered a lot of this type of mythology and what we can learn from it in some of our older videos on this channel. Feel free to throw it in reverse and check out some of those older videos. The production is not as great, but the information is solid. The antiquity of man's inner flame, the spirit fire, is currently buried beneath the ruins of man's fallen temple, obscured by a myriad of worldly interests. The flame of that candle is burnt out, but if you look close enough into communities like this one, it emits a very faint glow, like a diamond in the rough, a mythology peeking its head out of a non-philosophic age. We are what's left of that fire, and it is up to us to keep that ember glowing until the time comes that mankind as a whole is ready to warm its hands again. The divine spark is there, despite how thoroughly it's been blown out by those who consider themselves in charge of the world. That wick down the center of the candle is us. Our decisions are the oxygen that is available to reignite that flame. Our words and our actions, when leaning on each other like the walls of the pyramid, are the pneuma that will eventually supply that dim, glowing ember with the fuel it needs to catch fire again. And when that fire spreads, the darkness has no choice in the matter anymore. Because when the light comes, darkness doesn't just run. It completely ceases to exist, except as a shadow.